Now, Gongchik, yeah. So last class, we were at statement 28 of chapter 1. So there we had a chance to discuss, talk about where we talked about kind of two ways of relating to the Dharma. And they both have kind of like their the role to play, So if we have kind of related to Dharma like it's like commandments, like it's an article of faith or articles of faith, then to remember that the Dharma teachings and practices is a tool, and therefore, you could say having a more instrumental view of these practices, of these teachings. So using them as tools, experimenting with that, taking responsibility for your own experience, experimenting, really experimenting as in applying to see how it works, to see what works, what doesn't work, that instrumental is not always bad. That is necessary. So, like I said, everything the Buddha gave, Four Noble Truths, they are not to be believed. They are to be applied and used as tools. Then I also said, but then there's also the danger of, especially as I think the American, United States, the so-called American spirit, of being pragmatic. So then when we get in the mode of being too pragmatic, too efficient minded, too outcome oriented, another bad word in academia, if you ask me, outcomes, learning outcomes. Oh my God, hate those things. How do we measure learning outcomes? This is all business language talk, right? Never mind, I'm ranting about my whole life. But outcomes, So when we become too outcome oriented, that's because we have become too instrumental, right? Then Dharma practice also will not work. If you see your Dharma practice as merely a tool, a means to an end, and we get too clever. We think, oh, surely there's a faster way. Surely there's an easier way. Surely there's a way that can serve me more efficiently. Then we have to back away from that instrumental view, and take the other approach, where it's not an instrumental, right? It's a way to manifest. We see all these practices, all these techniques, all these methods, not just as a way to get to where we want to get to, but also the way to manifest what we already are. Why do we meditate? Because Buddhists meditate. Why do we see ourselves as Buddhas? Because Buddhas see themselves as Buddhas. Why do we cultivate the four immeasurables, which is the topic of statement 28? Because the essence of Buddhas are the four immeasurables. And so when we cultivate the four immeasurables, no matter how limited, it seems like a contradiction, no matter how limited our immeasurable is, we are participating in our true nature. And so I think this is, right, the gist of what we were looking at last time. Yeah, to be able to see these two sides. Yeah? And here particularly, the statement is to address the point of how the four immeasurables, they are on the, you could say, fundamental nature level of what Buddha is the way we are. Yeah. So it's fundamental to our nature and not merely instrumental. So that's 28, and 27 is more general, not more general, another category, which is the 37 factors of awakening already exist on the level of the what's known as the embryo of the tathagata. That's tathagata garbha. Embryo, it could be a word. It could be a translation of garbha, as in embryo or germ. So what it's saying is like even on the germ level, these 37 factors are already present. These 37 factors are not newly created at the point of result, at the point of full maturation, but that rather they are already present. Elsewhere, in another context, they'll talk about how the 112 marks of a Buddha, in classic descriptions of the physical characteristics or marks of Buddhas, it is said that there is 112 of these marks or qualities. Yeah, these 112 are the 32 major or major as in like obvious, most obvious marks, characteristics, and then the 80 more subtle characteristics of their physical form. There it said that these 112 physical marks are the result of 112 corresponding virtues and powers that a Buddha has. And there the discussion shows, or there the emphasis is that even on the level of the ground, meaning not yet actualized, already these 112 characteristics, these 112 qualities are present. And they're not newly made at the point of result. Ground, path, and result. Ground, path, and result. Like on all three kind of stages of this process, all the qualities are already present. That's the statement of 27 and 28 in chapter 1. And this, as I say, even within Tibetan Buddhism, there are debates that's regarding this point. There are those who agree and those who disagree. Those of you who are more well-read in these types of debates will recognize that this is Jigten Sumgön's position is a recognizable position, and that puts him together with a particular group of masters who look at it from this point of view. And then there is an opposing point of view. Generally speaking, you can say Kagyu, Nyingma is like Jigten Sumgön's view. Sakya and Gelug is the opposing view. But the nuances is not so blunt. It's not just that, oh, these people accept these people accept that. There's a lot of nuances, a lot of gray areas. But again, generally speaking. So I have a friend, who is almost all of his kind of exposure, education, very educated for sure, and experienced too, in the Gelugpa tradition for many years. But now starting to read things from kind of Kagyu, Nyingma, and frequently I will get a question like, what does this mean? Then it highlights for me how much we take for granted, those of us who are primarily exposed to Kagyu Nyingma, that, it's obvious to us what it means. But if you are primarily, kind of trained in Sakya or Gelug, you will look at some of these statements and you say, what? That sounds really weird. Then for us, it's like, we respond to their what? Like, what? That is really weird. What do you mean? You don't understand what this means. But there are, these differences. Yeah. Now, of course, people who follow Kyoba Rinpoche's way will say, well, what he says is right. But I'm not sure if I will commit 100% to that. And not because, I'm not sure, because of doubts about Kyoba Rinpoche. But I feel that Kyoba Rinpoche doesn't want us in any case, to fixate and say, wow, this is Kyoba Rinpoche and therefore I agree. But rather to be able to see that fundamentally, and this I think is very much Kyoba Rinpoche's commitment, or what matters to him. What matters to him is that not just philosophizing, not just abstract problems with abstract solutions, but rather, what implications does it have for your practice? That, I would say, that is a priority for him. Absolutely not a priority for him for us to say, oh, we accept Kyoba Rinpoche's explanations, 100%. And everybody else's explanation that contradicts is wrong. He doesn't care for you to have that kind of loyalty, because that kind of loyalty is simply fixation. Then you have turned Gongchik into another system, which is what in the first place he rejects. He says, I have no systems. Don't talk about systems. Because these systems can easily become something that you latch onto. Remember the statements that we looked at, it says like the true view. If we want to talk about view as something positive, the way the Buddha, in other words, talk about view as that which is needed in order for practice to be authentic. He says that view actually is talking about the view that comes from realization, not the view that arises from debate and from thinking and from philosophizing. Don't get me wrong. He is not saying don't learn, don't listen, don't reflect. He's not saying that. Yeah. But he's saying, be careful, What Buddha gave us as tools, don't turn into something to fixate on. So here you see another instance of how instrumental and fundamental, right? It's not always, we're not saying, fundamental is better than instrumental. Yeah. So here also, I would say, Kyoba Rinpoche said, understand that it's instrumental as in you apply it. Because one of the problems with fundamental is you might take that as an article of faith. And then in worst case scenario, you turn into a fundamentalist. This works very nicely, actually, at least in English. Then you turn into a Buddhist fundamentalist or a Drigong fundamentalist. Then I think Kyoba Rinpoche will be quite disappointed. I think it's also useful to remember that Kyoba Rinpoche never used the word Gongchik. Yeah, these statements were never meant. He never planned these statements to be put together. As much as we appreciate Sherab Jungne for putting all this together, because otherwise it will be very scattered, right? Thank goodness Sherab Jungne put together these statements. But nonetheless, don't forget, Kyoba Rinpoche did not say, oh, I want you to arrange all those important statements that I have made and arrange them into these chapters and arrange them in this order, because this really represents, the way I look at things. Yeah. I'm actually personally curious. I wonder if we could time travel back, right, and bring this to Kyoba Rinpoche, what his reaction might be, I'm not sure if he would wholeheartedly say, good job, or he would say, I fear that, now that it has all been put together into one thing, then it becomes, a contention point for people to argue and to debate. Yeah, he wasn't interested in arguing and debating that has no implications on practice. So I think it's important we keep that in mind, yeah? Because a lot of later, meaning by the time of Chodra for sure, and even before that, by that point, Gongchik did become a point of debate and contention. So I don't blame Chodra, the one who wrote the commentary for this, the first Chungsang Rinpoche. I don't blame him for entering that debate because he had no choice. Yeah, you don't exist in a vacuum. You exist, among a broader community, and the broader community has decided, we're going to debate and we are going to argue over this text that you guys published. So Chodra also has no choice, So we have to be able to distinguish between the concerns and the issues that the later period has to address, and back in Kyoba Rinpoche's time, and what his concerns are about. So 27, 28, yeah. Now, we skip 15 and 6, 14. So let's look at chapter 6, statement 14. We last time we were on chapter 6, we were looking at 17, statement 17, because statement 17 has to do with emptiness arising. Your realization of emptiness will allow you to see how out of emptiness emerges cause and effect. We looked at 17 because that is related more directly to statement 13, where Kyoba Rinpoche said, Mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one. You remember that? Yes, statement 13, Mahamudra And statement 12, view, practice, and conduct are the same. Statement 13, Mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one. And then related to that is statement 17, right? So now we still have to look at statement 14, 15, 16. Statements 14, 15, 16 of chapter 6 is directly also about qualities, the qualities of the result. So then on 14, statement 14 of chapter 6, if you have the physical book, it's page 601. That Vajra statement says Mahamudra is the embodiment of all qualities. Once again, this point is being made. This is then specifically, this statement is in response to people who claim that there are no faults and qualities in Mahamudra. And so then now, right, not surprisingly, you will find people saying, you know, when it comes to the Mahamudra state, both faults and qualities are irrelevant. You use Mahamudra, they say, to purify, not just faults, but even qualities, because qualities are nothing but the opposite of faults. And so if the Mahamudra state is non-dual, then both qualities and faults needs to be done with. Again, reasonable it sounds, you know, to speak like this. But Kyopa Rinpoche said, no. Because Mahamudra is the embodiment of all qualities. So I think before we even look at the commentary, right, to try to defend or to explain this, right, I think the easiest way to understand why this statement, you know, is true, or it makes sense for Kyopa Rinpoche to say this, is look at what we know about the Buddha. All the accounts that we have of Buddha Shakyamuni, whether in the Pali canon, or in the Tibetan canon, or Chinese canon, or, you know, how do they depict the Buddha? Somebody says something. Let me know you're still there. How do they depict the Buddha in this issue of qualities?
He always exhibits noble qualities.
Yeah. He always exhibits noble qualities. He always acts with noble qualities. So from there, you know, like, what else do you need to, you know, don't get all abstract and philosophical. Oh, actually, truly, he doesn't have qualities. No, I mean, that's the whole point. He has qualities. That's why we even strive to be like him. Yeah? So it's almost saying that in those places where it says, you know, the Buddha state is beyond qualities and faults, there is a limited reason for saying that. Right? When those statements are said, right, it is to highlight our limited concepts. But insofar as thinking about, you know, when we practice Mahamudra, when we practice the path, are qualities fundamental or not, right? Then we have to think, yes, they are fundamental. Otherwise, what's the point? Qualities are fundamental. And here Mahamudra then is the embodiment of all qualities. So let's look at the Chodrat's commentary. He says, at the time of the ground. So here he wants to show, like again, all the 3 points. On the ground level, meaning whether you are practicing or not practicing, whether you are training or not training. Ground. Then path, meaning, okay, now you are going to train. During training. Then result. You're done with training. You have achieved the result. So ground, path, and result or fruit. So he says, at the time of the ground, one possesses the naturally pure Buddha element. And what is this naturally pure Buddha element? All the qualities. The 37 factors. The 4 immeasurables. The 112 marks and signs. At the time of the path, there arises the accumulation of a vast amount of virtue by connecting the 5 perfections with discriminating knowledge. Discriminative knowledge is the 6th perfection. So connecting the 5 perfections that are sometimes said to be the accumulation of skillful means, and then the 6 perfections, the 6 paramita, discriminative knowledge or prajna. We usually use the word wisdom, but here Sobish uses the term discriminative knowledge. So by connecting the 5 perfections with the 6th perfection, and one abandons the 112 afflictions one must abandon on the path of seeing, and the 414 one must abandon on the path of practice. So here, on the time of the path, here he is using a classification system that talks about the 5 paths, the path of accumulation. So he says at the beginning of embarking on the path to Buddhahood, that is called the path of accumulation. A great amount of virtue needs to be created, needs to be amassed, needs to be collected. Then it connects these virtue, that's the next path, is called the path of joining or the path of connecting. Then it connects these great merit on the path of accumulation, will then connect the first 5 paramitas with the 6th paramita. So that on the 3rd path of the 5 paths, called the path of seeing, the 112 afflictions, these are the coarse afflictions, are removed. These 112 afflictions correspond with the 112 Buddha qualities that arise, which gives rise to 112 physical marks and characteristics of a Buddha. So on the path of seeing, these 112 afflictions are abandoned, purified. Then on the path of practice, this practice is not, it's a more advanced kind of practice. So the 4th of the 5 paths is called the path of practice. On the path of practice, then another 414 afflictions are abandoned. Then at the time of the result, one accomplishes the embodiment of the inexhaustible wheel of body, speech, and mind. This is the 5th path, the path of no more learning. This is attaining finally. So he quotes Maitreyanatha, if there were no Buddha element, meaning on the ground level, if there were no Buddha qualities, there would be no aversion to suffering. So this is a very important point, that we cannot stand suffering, that we are not comfortable with suffering, is said to be because we have Buddha nature. Another way of stating this is, as I've mentioned before, Khenchen Rinpoche said, how do we know we all have Buddha nature? Well, we know we all have Buddha nature because No matter how much suffering we experience, we never get used to it because that's not our nature. Our nature is freedom from suffering. So then, ironically, because our nature is freedom from suffering, then when suffering turns up, actually the angst. Normally we think the angst, right? When suffering turns up, right? We normally relate to the angst, to the discomfort as something that you don't want. I don't want that. But actually here is helping us to see that discomfort should be recognized as the evidence that your nature is Buddha. You see how this is turned around, like, oh, it's almost like the Christian, like when you recognize your sin. Of course, for many of us, it's hard to understand that, but I can sort of understand how it's sort of related, because in a powerful way, in the Christian context, it says that when you finally recognize that you are sinful, in that moment, you will also recognize the grace of God. Then in that moment, when you recognize the grace of God, the love of God, then your sins are taken away. It's similar in its kind of structure as what we're talking about here. To me, it's very similar. But of course, the whole style, the whole language is very different. So for those of you who are adverse to the notion of you are sinful, then stay away from it. But I feel if you really understand, the psychologies involved, then even a tradition that says you are fundamentally sinful, as long as you don't stop there, it can actually be purified in Buddhist terms. It's purified when you see the love of God, then in that moment, you are liberated. You are saved, in Christian expression. Then you are saved by grace, in a very mysterious way. Here we say you are liberated, once you recognize that even that angst, even that I don't want to suffer, is pointing you to how, see, that's your nature, that's your Buddha nature. So here, Maitreyanatha, if there were no Buddha nature, Buddha element, there would be no aversion to suffering. And there would be neither desire to pass beyond suffering, nor an effort and the aspiration towards it. That is also where I say, if you understand this point, then even your secret desires that you don't want other people to know, that you think is bad, actually that, is also a sign that, oh, look, this is Buddha nature, even if it is obscured. So I say the difference between, the proverbial Hitler and the proverbial Mother Teresa is not on the level of what they desire. The difference is how they went about to fulfill that desire. They both want an end to suffering. And insofar as that desire to end suffering, to be free from suffering, they're absolutely the same, because that's the Buddha nature. That's the Buddha element on the ground. But the path, the method that they use to answer that call, so to say, is where one leads to perpetual samsara and one leads to liberation. So in Dzogchen, they talk about one ground, two paths. The path of Rigpa and the path of Marikpa. lack of rigpa. One leads to consciousness, as in mentation, as in subject-object divide, and the other leads to yeshe, as in primordial wisdom. One ground, two paths. One ground, two results, samsara and nirvana. That's Dzogchen style of explaining. Gampopa takes a different way. He says, samsara, afflictive emotions, are dharmakaya. Again, on the level of expression, different from Dzogchen. Dzogchen says, two. It's important to distinguish the two. Gampopa points to more. Gampopa takes the approach of the fundamental oneness of these two. So he says, namto, mental proliferation, is dharmakaya, namto joku. So then he coined this phrase, ordinary consciousness, as a synonym for Buddha nature. Another term used is co-emergent or co-emergence. What is co? Meaning every moment of even confused existence, Buddha mind is right there. Buddha mind is right there. The stronger you experience confused mind, afflictive emotions, the stronger actually Buddha mind is also lurking there. So it's a matter of, do you know how to look the other way? If you know how to flip it around, then you're free.
May I make a comment about that?
Yes, sure.
I have thought, I think I enjoy music and some opera, and Wagner was a German composer who lived during Hitler's time, or maybe during that whole era. And he was apparently a pretty despicable human being. But it has occurred to me, his overtures to his operas are some of the most beautiful music I think I have personally ever heard. And I see that when he gets out of the way, his Buddha nature is so on display.
Yes.
You can't miss it.
Yes.
And great artists, I think, have that when the muse strikes, it's Buddha nature being revealed.
Right.
But then they forget it.
I think in a less even in a less charged context, like Wagner and Hitler, it's like the tragic artists, writers, have very tortured lives, but these brilliance also come through because that shows, it's there, but unfortunately they don't, in our terms, they don't have the merit to turn that. So Milarepa was a tragic figure if he had not met Marpa. So Wagner, like that side, right? There's that side, and then there's this other side.
And we all have it to a lesser.
And we all have, yes, both the demon and the Buddha. So a few weeks back, I shared with you a Tiantai take on this issue. A very radical statement. They say, for Buddhists, the seeds of evil are still present, which of course, I think no Tibetan tradition will go with you in that direction. They said, no, by definition, it's purified. But But if you try to look at it from the Tiantai point of view, why that statement is there, it makes a lot of sense. It says, because the seeds of evil are still present even in Buddhas, because those seeds are also then the way that allows Buddhas to have an understanding of why people do stupid things that they do. But these seeds no longer activate in Buddhas. In us, the seeds are there, but the seeds get activated when the conditions are right. So Tiantai's way of looking at it is like that. So 615, statement 15 of chapter 6, all qualities arise from meditative equipoise. So this is a further kind of fine-tuning of the issue of qualities. And this is more specifically responding to those who say that the qualities do not arise during meditative equipoise, but afterward. Okay, this is a little kind of hair-splitting, I think, for us at least. This is when people, again, based on their research of Buddhist texts, like these great panditas, these great scholars, in trying to make it all, hang together and come up with this philosophical system that is, that all hangs together, that is consistent, in ways that, a philosophy department would require you to have. They say that during meditative equipoise, particularly meditation on emptiness, they say, when you are in that state, no qualities exist because it's empty. And the experience of that is also empty. But they say, when you come out of that meditative state, that meditative equipoise, all the qualities will appear. Will appear. So meaning that these are like not present during the meditation state, not your kind of meditation or my kind of meditation, okay? Not your kind of meditation or my kind of meditation. We're talking about very advanced meditation on emptiness. So these, the other people will say, during that time, no, those qualities don't exist. But the qualities will arise when you come out of meditation. So these are also the view that will say, and it's, Gelugpa is one example, in Gelugpa discussions about these, they will say, and this is the scenario that they usually give. They say, if a Buddha was alone in an empty room, all by him or herself, does he perceive suffering or not? They'll say, no, they don't. But the moment a sentient being walks into the room, then Buddhas perceive suffering. How? Via what the sentient being is experiencing. That makes some sense, makes sense in terms of logically thinking about it, because when Buddhas have completely purified all bases of experiencing suffering, left to themselves, they don't experience suffering. But whenever a confused sentient being turns up, then due to the power of their compassion, it facilitates Buddha's understanding, oh, there is suffering. And then from there, the Buddha qualities will illusorily manifest. You see, that's how they explain where the qualities come from. Yeah. And again, you know, it's a good explanation, you know, because in this explanation, they want to emphasize the absolute transcendence of Buddhists, so that they're no longer implicated in any way whatsoever with suffering. But when they are so completely transcendent, you run the risk of Buddhas being empty space, you know. Empty space also has no suffering, you know, and no qualities, you know. So you mean what? Becoming a Buddha is to poof into nothing? So here, the way Kyopa Rinpoche addresses this issue, he says, all qualities arise from meditative equipoise. So this is an interesting statement. He's not saying quite that during meditative equipoise on emptiness, the qualities are present, not exactly that, but he also doesn't want to agree with the opposing view, which is the qualities only arise almost like incidentally after you come out of this meditation. So let's look at the commentary. Since the root of roaming in samsara is grasping of a self, the beings, because they accumulate the blessing of the guru who possesses the characteristics and the dependent origination of the disciples' respectful devotion, the beings abandon that grasping through the vital points of the instructions. To remain in such a state is called meditative equipoise. So here, Chodra defines meditative equipoise. So what is meditative equipoise? It is basically having recognized nature of mind. They give up grasping on self, and that is the meditative equipoise. The meditative equipoise of abandoning grasping of self. How do you abandon grasping of self in this system? Ultimately, it is through recognizing nature of mind. Then, right, habituating that recognition. And all of that happens through the interdependence between a guru with qualities and characteristics of realization and a disciple with sincere devotion, when those two come together. At the time when they arise from that, the subsequent consciousness is the arising of mental afflictions and conceptions. So at the time when they arise from that is referring to when they stop when they stop resting in or remaining in this recognition of nature of mind. Meaning when you, because you're not Buddha yet, right? So your recognition is not stable. You will have meditation time when it's stable. And then when you get up, you know, so he says, yes, at the time when they arise from this state of training in stabilizing what has been recognized, then the next consciousness is the arising of mental afflictions and conceptions. The quality of maintaining meditative equipoise is such that they finally obtain the path of seeing. And then he says, therefore, the longer they are able to remain training in stabilizing the recognition, i.e., to remain in meditative equipoise, then eventually this will lead to the path of seeing. At that time, the 12 sets of 100 qualities, right? The 112 basically, and so forth arise. And from that again, finally attain the Buddhahood that accomplishes the twofold purpose. Lord Mahamudra said, 10th stage bodhisattvas are possessors of the quality of dwelling without the arising of mind. So here we have to rely on Sobish to unpack this commentary. So if you look at his notes, another false understanding of Mahamudra is, according to the Dorshema, the opinion of some scholars and some great meditators. So even some great meditators will say this. That's because when you are in the meditative state, everything is quiet. Then you think, So anyway, some scholars and some great meditators who claim that meditative equipoise, so remaining stable in meditation, nyamsha, which is like space, is emptiness. It is, they say, neither obscured by virtue nor by non-virtue, which are like white and black clouds in the sky. Therefore, according to them, meditative equipoise is an unconditioned phenomena, but true phenomena. As opposed to space is also unconditioned phenomena, but it's not the same as this meditative equipoise. And thus no faults or qualities arise from this meditative equipoise. If qualities were to arise from it, then, according to them, meditative equipoise would be conditioned. See, for them, any kind of movement implies conditionality. And emptiness cannot be involved in conditionality. Therefore, any virtue that arises is what is technically called a subsequent consciousness. Meaning, when you get up from remaining in this stability of emptiness meditation. Citing the general opinion, the Rinjangma refers only to the terms meditative equipoise and aftermath state. That is Rinjangma's way of talking about subsequent consciousness. Accordingly, people say that one abandons the grasping of a self, which is the root of samsara, through a realization that arises from the blessings of the Guru endowed with a characteristic. To remain in the state of such a realization is called meditative equipoise. When one arises from such a meditative equipoise, mental afflictions and constructions arise again. This is called aftermath state. Some scholars and some kusalipas, great meditators, says, Rinchen Changjub, hold that since meditative equipoise is emptiness, no defects and qualities are accomplished. According to them, mundane and transmundane qualities are accomplished in the aftermath state, in the subsequent to meditation on emptiness state. Choki Drakpa's argument is a brief summary of Dorshema. According to Dorshema, qualities expand in proportion to the expansion of meditative equipoise. The more one removes impediments from one's practice, the more the dwelling in subsequent consciousness will shrink. And as it shrinks, meditative equipoise further expands along with the qualities. This happens gradually up to the 10th bodhisattva stage, where the qualities arise inconceivably. At this point, bodhisattvas dwelling on the 10th stage abandon the subsequent consciousness completely. When Mahamudra says that the 10th stage bodhisattvas have the quality of dwelling without the arising of the mind, he indicates that for them, finally, subsequent consciousness does not arise anymore. But the aftermath stage does. They attain Buddhahood in this essence of meditative equipoise. And from that arises the maturation and liberation of sentient beings through the wheel of the inconceivable ornament of body, speech, and mind. If that were not the case, and the qualities would arise from subsequent consciousness, the perfection of all qualities would arise for ordinary beings, since at all times they dwell only in subsequent consciousness. What's going on here is, at the root of what the concern here is that the opposing view separates out meditation from qualities, and particularly meditation on emptiness and qualities. And they prioritize meditation on emptiness, because when you are meditating on emptiness, all graspings are done with. Yeah? And even temporary meditation on emptiness, not yet Buddha, then temporarily grasping is also done with. So the opposing view sees the meditation on emptiness as almost competing with the development of qualities. You see what's going on here? They say that the development of qualities is something contrived that needs to be done in the subsequent to arising from meditating on emptiness. That then you need to, in a contrived way, develop love, develop compassion, develop joy, develop like the 4 immeasurables. Here, Kyopa's statement is, no, they are one and the same thing. So here is really addressing the danger of separating out absolute and relative bodhicitta. Instead of 2 sides of the same coin, we think they are 2 different things. And sometimes even thinking one will obstruct the other. Such as during the last class, Leonard shared with us, certain, not all, certain Theravada teachers see the 4 immeasurables as problematic, competing with the work of giving out self-grasping. So as Leonard shared with us, some of them will teach. First, you develop the first 3 so that you develop the 4th, equanimity, to get rid of the first 3. So this is related to that issue, where here it says, no. Actually, if you actually do the correct kind of, staying in the meditative equipoise of emptiness, the very fact of removing self-grasping gives rise to those qualities. And so those qualities are not contrived. The qualities are not contrived. Yes, during the meditation state, those qualities are not going to be active. But don't see remaining in that to be superior to the exercising of the qualities post that experience. But rather, the more you're able to subdue self-grasping, the more love and compassion manifest. So Rinjama summarizes this. Last 3 points here. If qualities arose from subsequent consciousness, which is what the opposing position says, right? So you have your meditative equipoise, and then you get out of meditative equipoise. Then in post-meditative equipoise, is what is called subsequent consciousness. There, you systematically or in a contrived way develop the qualities. So he says, if that was the case, then ordinary beings would continuously dwell, would have more qualities. Because they don't ever dwell in recognizing nature of mind, recognizing emptiness. But that is not the case, he says. Right? Meditative equipoise expands and subsequent consciousness shrinks gradually for the bodhisattvas as they advance through the 10 stages. In just that manner, qualities are known to increase. When the 10th stage bodhisattva has completely abandoned even the subsequent view, the subtlest view of knowledge, veil of knowledge, they attain Buddhahood. And the qualities of separation and maturation arise from their continuous abiding in meditative equipoise. So meditative equipoise and the arising of qualities are directly related, not competing practices. So again, you know, don't get tricked or don't misunderstand that this is talking about what happens at the level of fruit, at the level of result. Seemingly, this is talking about level of result, but no, this is about once again, it's about the path. It's about practice. Kyoba Rinpoche's priority. So he's not interested actually ultimately into debating, you know, at the end when you become a Buddha, is it this way or that way? He says, we cannot, because that's conceptual mind, you know. Why this discussion needs to be understood is if we see, practice of absolute bodhicitta and the practice of relative bodhicitta as somehow competing with each other, then we will be practicing mistaken absolute bodhicitta and mistaken relative bodhicitta. But when we understand that in fact these two aspects of bodhicitta are two sides of the same coin, then when we practice absolute bodhicitta, love and compassion should arise. When we practice love and compassion, understanding of emptiness should arise. And that can be used as a yardstick for us to know, am I practicing absolute bodhicitta right? Or am I practicing, relative bodhicitta right? See, everyone is looking at you. Wave, Ophelia. This is Ophelia's way of saying, it's time already. We have to play. Then I have to say, no, not yet. You have to wait. Yeah, so this is really still about, it's about the path. It's about practice. This is not about speculating, about the result. So if you want to know, like, am I practicing absolute bodhicitta right? Look at whether love and compassion is increasing or not. Am I practicing relative bodhicitta right? Look at whether you are free from suffering or not. Because I know a lot of people who practice Tonglen, they are very unhappy. Well, exaggeration, not a lot of people. But you can see that, their practice of Tonglen is very sentimental. A lot of grasping. They are so saddened by the suffering, especially, that then they think, oh, I'm practicing Tonglen, But here, no, it's not practicing Tonglen. Because your practicing of love and compassion is leading to more suffering. then it's not the right practice. Yeah, you see how this works? Okay, now say something.
I have a question. When we're doing the fivefold Mahamudra in the bodhicitta branch of or fold, we are trying to generate the state for the deity part, like bringing ultimate bodhicitta, like a sort of emptiness with the quality of compassion, love,
Yes,
inspiration.
correct.
So this is related with generating
yes,
this.
so when the deity appears, right, it appears vividly. That is the love and compassion. That is relative bodhicitta. But it is free from an essence, free from fixation. That is absolute bodhicitta of the deity. That is the wisdom aspect.
Okay.
So that's why we say the idam is the embodiment of bodhicitta, both absolute and relative.
Yeah, this is because well, in some other Jidan practices, I have like generate emptiness, and from that state, then generate visualize, generate. So it is like even if it is emptiness, there is the qualities from the deity writers. That is what we're learning now, that well, there is qualities in the emptiness, and they are the
yes,
where
yes. I see what you're saying, because there's a way of talking about deity yoga, a more common way, especially when you talk about generation state, completion stage. They talk as if these are two separate things. But in a more subtle way of understanding, they're inseparable.
Okay. Yeah, I had was that
yes,
thing, because
and once you understand that they're inseparable, there's no need to like specifically, oh, now is completion, oh, now is generation.
Okay. Yeah, because they start well usually with emptiness, and then you
yes,
and a mudra, but they're essentially the same.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Lai.
Then this is also related to Namto Choku. Mental proliferation is Dharmakaya. You see?
Yeah.
Yes, Larry.
614. It says if there, Vajra statement 614.
Yeah.
It says in the commentary, if there were no Buddha element, there would be no aversion to suffering.
Yes.
To me, that's very important, because it's evidence that we can see in our own life of the truth of the Buddha nature.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And it also is very logical to me, because in the meditative equipoise discussion, it's quite logical that if you have the Buddha nature, the problem is your obscurations.
Yes.
So if you just work on your afflictions,
which is what the meditative equipoise does. Yes.
Yes. And also the idea of expanding meditative equipoise into wider and wider periods of time in your daily life, you're going to expand the ability of Buddha nature to come forth in wider periods of time.
Yes.
My thinking about the two positions is that the position expressed here is superior, because the qualities are going to appear, they're going to manifest when you are coming in contact with things outside of your meditation session.
Yes.
In other words, to have compassion for someone is going to occur when you meet somebody outside of your meditation session.
Yes.
So to me, the qualities are there, but they're not manifested until
because
you're in some other circumstance.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
That's all I have to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And so here, I want to emphasize, for me, more important here is not really the question of will or will it not arise. It's more important is for us to use this as a way to measure or to gauge, you know. So let's say you have meditative equipoise, okay? Or you think it's the meditative equipoise we're talking about. So equipoise, right? So a whole morning has passed, right? Then you get up, right? And then you meet someone and they annoy you and you're like, ah, you know, you ruined my morning. I was having such a good meditation, you know? Then you know, that wasn't meditative equipoise. No matter what I thought it was, it wasn't, because it did not, right, lead to an increase of qualities when real life situations. Yeah. To me, it's more important that this is not really talking about, you know, like when Buddhas are Buddhas, how they will be. This is really talking about, you know, when on the path, you know, how can ideas about the Buddha state change the way we practice here. Then likewise, you know, if we think, oh, I have so much love, compassion, I'm practicing love, compassion, right? And you're like, oh, I don't need to do this meditative equipoise business. I just run around, love, compassion. But then at the end of the day, you're exhausted. And your, you know, personal life becomes messier and messier, even if your public profile is a loving and, you know, sacrificing type. But more and more suffering. Then you should recognize, oh, actually, these are not qualities. Because there's, you know, because suffering is there, and suffering is the result of grasping. So these are not qualities. These are afflictive emotions, you know, the so-called love, compassion that you're busy doing in the world. Uh, 616 we will look at just to kind of look ahead. Yeah, it's very interesting because 616 is to counteract the danger of going too far with how if you just have meditative equipoise, qualities will come. Yeah, it's to address that extreme. So he says here, if one has not established the cause, the qualities will not arise. Because there are people who say, you know, the qualities will arise without needing to pay attention to it. So then this is the opposite view, which says, oh, no need to generate bodhicitta. The cause here is talking about generating bodhicitta. Saying, I am going to do everything for the purpose of not just freeing myself from suffering, but freeing all beings from suffering. You can also make the mistake of thinking, oh, that's not necessary, because I just need to work on removing, right? Grasping. This, I would say, would be to kind of go in the Hinayana way without actively applying the Mahayana. And that also doesn't work. And we talked about that, when we talked about, right, the line between Hinayana and Mahayana is not, whether you act in a compassionate way or not, whether you practice generosity or not. The real line is, are you actively committing to working for the benefit of others? Or are you just, at best, indirectly? As long as it's indirect, or worse, not present, then it is not Mahayana. Bodhicitta needs to be actively cultivated. So in that sense is what it means here. The cause has to be established. Bodhicitta, nonetheless, needs to be something explicit that we commit to. So that's it for today. Reminder, we're not meeting Friday morning. Then even if you didn't sign up for this retreat because your schedule don't allow you, join us on Facebook, join us whenever you can throughout Saturday. And especially Friday, the transmission session is good to join us Friday night if you're in the Americas. Then if you're in Asia, then it's Saturday morning. Chanchu Semcho Rinpoche Mage Banam Ge Gyurche Ke Banyam Pa Me Bayam Gong Ne Gong Du Bel War Sho. Ta-ta.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you.